Hey everyone, we're back. Today we'll be talking about null determiners. We've talked about a lot of null things, and today we're finally reaching probably the end of these null constituents that we've discussed, null determiners. Now, if you've been watching my other videos, you'll know already what this will be about. Basically, what we're trying to say here is that there is a determiner phrase, also known as a DP, and the head of this determiner can be overt. In this case, it could be an article like the, or it could be a demonstrative pronoun like that. It could even be a quantifier and so on. But as we shall see today, the head of the determiner can also be null. Now, this null head will have certain characteristics such as grammatical features. It will have selectional features, like what does it go with, and it will also have semantic features, as we shall see. And we'll end the video by answering one of the questions I got from a subscriber, and hopefully that would clear up some confusion around the topic. Without further ado, let's get started. So null determiners. First, how do we know that null determiners exist? We have what we call cross-linguistic evidence. Cross-linguistic evidence basically means that we compare languages in order to prove or disprove a certain phenomenon. Here, the existence of a null determiner, which I will refer to here as a lowercase dash. So Italians love opera. So here we have actually two DPs. We have Italians and opera. So how do we know that these two are determiners, head of determiners, but actually they're not visible? We simply look at another language, the same structure, the same semantic meaning, but this language, in this case, the second sentence, this language would be French. First one, of course, is English. So the second language, French, does not allow for null determiners. So in this case, they will have to pronounce, or they'll have to spell out the determiner. So instead, they can't say Italien. They have to say les Italiens. Same thing for opera. They can't say opera. It's missing. It's missing. This E is not how it should be. I hope no one will have a seizure. No French person will have a seizure upon looking at this sentence. But what you see here is the determiner, l'opéra. It's not opera. So they can't say Italiens adorent opéra. No, they have to say les Italiens adorent l'opéra. This is just how the language works. It doesn't allow for null determiners. A rough translation of this French sentence over here, if you want to make the determiners visible, then we will say the Italians adore the opera, which of course is not the proper way of saying the sentence. The first one is the proper way, and the first one has two locations where the determiner is null. Now, this is the first piece of evidence, cross-linguistic. The second piece of evidence is coordination, and we have talked about coordination. We've used it quite a lot throughout this coverage of null constituents. We have established that in order for two structures to be coordinated, they have to be the same. Now, let's look at the first sentence. So we have the first sentence here, Italians, and the majority of Mediterranean, and the majority of Mediterraneans. So we have this sentence here, which is coordinated with the second part, the majority of Mediterranean. And the second part here, we have a determiner. And the first part of the coordination, we don't have a determiner. But the meaning is still the same. When we say Italians and the majority of Mediterraneans love opera, the meaning of Italians as a DP and the meaning of the majority of Mediterraneans as a DP are kind of equivalent in terms of meaning or semantic meaning, which also means that the structure will be the same, at least for the DP, because Italians here is a DP headed by a null constituent, a null determiner, but the majority of Mediterranean is also a DP, but it has a lot of complement there. As you can see, there's of Mediterraneans, which is a PP, and it keeps going. This coordination is possible because there is a null determiner here, despite the fact that we can't see it. Now let's look at the second example. Italians love opera and the finer things in life. So opera here is being coordinated with the finer things in life. So in opera here, there is no the, but here we have the the. The fact that these two sentences, these two structures can be coordinated in such a way proves to us that opera actually is not a truncated NP. It's actually a DP headed by a null determiner. Now that we've talked about the null determiners and some evidence to prove that they do exist, let's look at a tree structure where the null determiner itself is visible. On the tree structure at least, it's not real. I don't mean that it's spelled out. So here's our example. Let's start from the bottom. And as you can see, opera here is the noun N, but it's actually headed by a null constituent, as you can see. This null constituent is a determiner. They both combine and merge and form a D. The sentence continues as usual until we reach the subject position in the specifier of the TP. Again, here we have Italians. Same thing is happening. We have a noun or the nominal word Italians, which is also headed by a null determiner. If this had been the French sentence, it would be the same, but since French does not allow for null determiners, at least in this example, here we will have les, and here we'll have L apostrophe, because two vowels cannot be next to each other in French. So I hope this was straightforward. It's quite simple, but there are some intricacies that we're going to discuss in a moment. They mainly have to do with the features of this null determiner, because if you think of a determiner like les, this one for example, it does subcategorize, which means what needs to come after it has to be a noun and it has to be in the plural form. Now the question is, how about null determiner in English? Does it also subcategorizes for something that needs to come after it? Otherwise the sentence is incorrect. That's what we're gonna see. So the first thing we're gonna look at is this claim here. Null determiners have specific grammatical, selectional, and semantic properties. We'll check these subclaims one by one. Let's start with the first one. Let's look at our sentence here. Same thing. Everything is taken from Bradford's book 2004. We have we, you, or null. Linguists take blank too seriously. The question is, how are we going to fill this blank? We can fill it by different pronouns, and that would depend on what we select on the initial stage. Is it going to be we? Is it going to be you? Or is it going to be a null? Let's look at the tree diagram or tree structure that I have drawn below. So we start from the bottom. So seriously is an adverb phrase. That's clear. Then we go to a degree head to, which merges with the adverb phrase and they form a degree phrase. Then this goes into a DP, and this DP is headed by a D. So far, we don't know what this D is. Usually, if we are actually constructing the sentence, we would know. But let's leave it empty now. We move to a VP, head V, nothing abnormal. Then we go to a T, which has its phi features. This symbol here is the symbol for phi. Don't mix it with the null symbol that I use. So this one is different. Phi features basically stand for person and number features, and it's a whole rabbit hole of its own, and I think I have briefly discussed this in one of my videos. I think they're one of my most recent videos. I discussed phi features, and also discussed this in my video about feature valuation. Now I don't want to draw everything out and write all the phi features and talk about all the operations that happen, because I just want to save some time, but we're skipping a lot of steps because they're besides the point here. Now let's continue. We move on to the spec of the TP. The spec of TP is a DP headed by the NP linguists and the D, we or you or null. Now if we choose we, what do you think would be the appropriate thing to put here? So we linguists take blank too seriously. If you've been following, you would say that the appropriate reflexive pronoun to put here would be ourselves. All right, so we already know that if we have a we, then the matching reflexive pronoun is ourselves, first person, ourselves. Now let's talk about you. You linguists take blank too seriously. Now the answer here would be, because we're saying you linguists, it should be second person. So the answer would be yourselves. So now we've established that these overt, it's like we or you, which function as pronouns usually, but in this structure they are determiners for linguists. We've established that we selects for a first person reflexive pronoun, you selects for a second person reflexive pronoun, and then the last one, null. Let's try to pronounce the sentence without overtly saying anything. Let's skip it, null. So let's go. Linguists take blank too seriously. Now let's try the first two words or reflexive pronouns. Can we say linguists take ourselves too seriously? No. Can we say linguists take yourselves too seriously? No. But what if we say linguists take and then themselves too seriously? All of a sudden the sentence is fine. Linguists take themselves too seriously. What do we infer from this? We do infer that a null determiner subcategorizes for third person reflexive pronoun. That's the first grammatical and property that we can say that null determiners can have. Let's move on to the second point. The second point here is the selectional properties of the null determiner, and we have this sentence here again. I wrote poems, I wrote poetry, but I wrote poem is incorrect. Why? What does that say? It says that the null determiner selects for a noun that is either a plural noun, like we see in here, or a mass plural noun, like poetry. So you can say I wrote poetry and I wrote poems, but you can't say I wrote poem. Why? Because actually here there is a DP, and this DP is headed by this null constituent, and this null constituent / null determiner only wants the noun that follows it to be either plural or mass noun. This is the second property. So we've talked about a grammatical property, we've talked about a selectional property. Now let's move on to the third point. So the next property is that of semantic meaning or semantic interpretation, and what we're trying to say here is that these null determiners can be either generic or partitive in their semantic interpretation. What do we mean by that? So if we look here at these two nouns, eggs and bacon. So eggs are fattening, bacon is fattening. Here we're talking about things in a general manner, so in a generic manner. So we're talking about eggs in general, bacon in general. But if we look at the same, and the claim here, again, no need to repeat it, but let's do it just to make sure that everybody is following with this. The claim is that these are DPs, and the null constituent head in the D has a generic meaning, or the noun that comes after it, it gives it a generic meaning. In C and D, here the meaning suddenly changes. It doesn't be, it's not generic anymore. It's partitive. So I had eggs for breakfast, which means some eggs. Obviously, I didn't have all the eggs that exist on the planet for breakfast. I had bacon for breakfast, which means some bacon. So this meaning here now is partitive. So the claim here is that null determiner can give either a generic meaning, let's write a G for that, or a partitive meaning. That's also a semantic feature that these null determiners have. So far we've talked about the grammatical, we've talked about the selectional, and finally we're talking about the semantic feature of null determiners. Now let's move on. Okay, it's time for generalizations. After discussing all of this, now it's time to introduce the DP hypothesis, which works only for nominals and pronominals. A DP hypothesis means that any nominal or pronominal element that is in an argument's position has to be a DP. And that DP can either be headed by a visible / overt determiner, or I zoomed in, let me fix that, or a null determiner, or sometimes if it's a P expression or a pronoun, then it's just a D. It doesn't even have a complement. It's just a D, just like that. Now, as I said, this structure is valid only for arguments. And what do I mean by arguments? Let me explain that in a second. So any sentence would have a predicate, and then this predicate will need two things. One is important and mandatory, and that would be the subject, the doer of the predicate. Could be a doer, could be a receiver. And then the predicates optionally can have a complement. A complement with an E, not with an I. Because if you write with an I, then it means something else. This is quite a common mistake for some students. So this here is optional. It depends on the predicates. It depends on the language. So what we're saying here is that any nominal or pronominal expression that is occupying this position or this position needs to be a DP. And that DP itself has only three possible instantiations, which are a DP with an overt D, a DP with a covered D, or a D expression, just the pronoun itself. Now, how about nominals that are not arguments. What do we do with them? The DP hypothesis in that case does not apply, and those nominals are not considered DPs. Instead, they're considered only NPs, as we shall see in the next segment. So let's look at these three sentences here. The first one is a vocative. So it's what we use to get someone's attention by addressing them. So first one, the nominal doctor here, the highlighted one, is a vocative. The second one is a predicative. Yes, nominals can be predicatives in constructions that use the verb see or copular be. The last one is an exclamative. So in all of these three cases, these are not DPs. Not a DP, not a DP, not a DP. What is it then? These are considered nominal expressions or N expressions, which means when we split the sentence into its tree diagram, we use an NP to refer to them. Like looking at this sentence, head of department in sentence B is an NP. It's not a DP because it's not in an argument position. So we use the NP maximum structure instead of the DP. And then let's continue with the sentence. We go to the T. Here the copular verb be will occupy the T head. And then if we go to the specifier, which is also the subject of the TP, we'll see that Dr. Doolittle is actually a DP. So why is Dr. Doolittle is a DP while head of department is an NP? Simply because this is a DP in an argument position, or this is a nominal expression in an argument position. Therefore, we can use a DP to refer to it. And for the lower nominal expression, it's an N expression because it's not in an argument position. So that's the difference between N expressions and D expressions. Good. I hope so far everything is clear. Now, there is a bit of confusion that sometimes arises regarding whether we should put an N or a DP or an NP. Well, at least for the last two, DP or NP. I hope this video will help you out a little bit. Well, let's discuss that by answering a question from one of the channel subscribers. So the question says, I actually have a question in regards to syntactic structures. If you could answer it, that would be really appreciated. How do I know when word within a syntactic structure is only an N and not an NP, like the kind versus the car? All right, so first of all, both of these are DPs. Why are they DPs? Because we actually have an overt determiner. So there's no discussion about that. So in this case, it will be the, and then the continuation would be the NP. I'll take the car in this case, and I'm going to write NP and then car. Now, we are assuming here that both of these D expressions happened in an argument position. Otherwise, we can't use the DP structure. Now, the thing that happens here is that we use an NP as a maximal projection, but if we really want to be pedantic and draw and discuss everything, then we actually should write an NP, and if it doesn't have a complement, then it ends with an N. You need the head of the N, and then finally draw the car. But most of the time in practice, if the phrase is headed only by its head and it doesn't have its complement, most of the time what we will see is just the word car written here. Now, this is for the car. For the other thing that you've mentioned here, the other example is this phrase here, the kind. Now, the kind is a little bit different, but I would also say it's a DP, because the thing with the kind is that you feel it's not complete. So something else needs a complement. So the kind of something. In this case, actually, we should and we must use an NP, and you'll see why. Because this NP will split into the N, the kind, and then we'll need a complement for this N, and most likely it will be a PP. The kind of books I like, or the kind of something, yada yada yada. Let me move my head so that you can see what I'm writing. Okay, so going back to your initial question, if it's in an argument position, you know it's a DP. That's one. If it's a DP, sometimes you might have sentences whose NP, the NP inside a DP, does not need a complement, like the car. In this case, in practice, most of the time, what you will find is a car. And just because they wrote car, it doesn't mean that this is actually not a phrase. It is a whole phrase on its own. It just happens to not have any complement. And if we want to be pedantic, we need to do it like this. But most of the time, that's not the case. That's for the car. If we look at the other one, the kind, then this one will necessitate an NP because actually this one has a complement. So it will be the kind, and then you will continue with the derivation of the sentence. One last thing I want to say before we end the video is sometimes, despite what I said, despite saying that everything is a phrase, so it's an NP, sometimes you'll come across sentences that will actually just put an N here and then write the word. And we've actually had one of these at the beginning. I think the word was opera, the nominal phrase. And it's a bit confusing, but it has its own explanation, and I think we should discuss them. So here the two options we had were either to go with an NP. In that case, if you go with an NP and then you write opera under it, what you're saying is, I'm writing the maximal projection. I know this NP is headed by an opera, it doesn't have a complement, but I don't want to go into the details of that NP. I'm just going to write opera and that's it. We leave it there. But for those who are going to use N, the argument is, I know that this NP lacks a complement. Therefore, I'm just going to go straight to the head and write an N, and that's it. No need for an NP, no need for that layer, because we don't really need it. There is no complement. Now, I personally prefer the former, just because it's better to stick to the general rule, and also it might be a bit misleading, it might create confusion. Because yes, we don't have that layer, but it's in this sentence that we don't have that layer. In this structure, we don't have that layer. In other cases, like we've seen with the kind of books I like to read, the kind of. In this case, we need that complement because we have an adjective phrase, a PP phrase. But that's my personal opinion. The safest bet would be to check with your teacher, professor, instructor, tutor, and ask them, do you want me to have the maximal projection, NP, and then whatever it's head in it, under it, without going into the detail of that maximal projection if it lacks a complement? Or, in the case of that P lacking a complement, would you rather have me just delete the NP layer and go straight to the N and write the word over there? This is the safest bet. Ask your teacher or whoever is going to eventually examine you what they prefer, what they like. If you're doing your own personal research, or if you're studying on your own, or if you're not going to be examined, to avoid confusion, I personally stick with this, with the maximal projection. That's it. I hope you learned something, and see you soon with another video.